Hello everyone and welcome to ZP Productions, and today I'll be doing a final review of this lens here. This is the 85mm F1.2L DS lens for the EOS R. And what does DS mean? It means defocus smoothing. Let's take a look at this lens here and whether it fits what you want to do. So before I start, I would like to thank SL Revolution and Canon for providing me this copy here, because I would have not went out to buy this lens or loan this lens, as if you have seen my reviews earlier, I own the original 85 1.2, and pretty much there is no reason to own this unless I am a bokeh freak. But we all know bokeh is subjective and bokeh is not everything a photo is, So is it worth it to pay more for a lens that just focuses on bokeh at the expense of some light? And in this review here, we are going to look at it, talk about it, and see the various situations where sometimes, yes, this bokeh do feel and look better, and at times, maybe not so. So usually I split my reviews into three parts: the physical dimension, the image quality, and then finally how I feel about this lens. Now, for this lens itself, I'm not going to talk about the physical dimensions because look here, they are exactly the same. They share the same filter thread and they share the same hood. So if you want to look at the physical dimension, look up the link above and you can go to my original 85 1.2 review there to see this physical dimension and how it actually works out. So let's get straight to the image quality of this lens. Now, I want to give you a bit of background to this defocus smoothing because Canon calls it DS, but in the market there are lenses with similar effect. In fact, Fuji, Laowa, and Sony has such lenses, and they use something called an APD filter within the lens itself that has this gradiated radial neutral density within the lens itself. And that means there's actually an extra piece of glass or plastic or filter within the lens that has these dark edges and very clear center in the glass itself, to give you this smooth bokeh effect. Now, as I said, this lens is exactly the same as the original 1.2. Obviously means that Canon did not put any additional piece of glass, additional piece of plastic, because if not, it will weigh a few grams more. So what Canon did was, rather than putting extra stuff into the lens, they coated two pieces of glass, look at the diagram here, in front and behind the aperture. And it results in the same effect, same loss of light, same smooth bokeh. And what makes this lens really different and special compared to this, all these Sony, Fuji, and Laowa lenses is that Canon did it on their biggest aperture prime, which is the 85 1.2 here. Now, Sony did it on a 100 f2.8, Fuji did it on a 56 1.2, which is a crop sensor lens, and Laowa did it on 100 f2. After this lens, the 100 f2 is probably the biggest aperture lens you can get, and as such, it also produces the second biggest bokeh after this 85 1.2. If the 85 1.2 is extended to 100 mm, this is probably equivalent to a 100 mm f1.4 in terms of bokeh and look. So getting that out of the way, just note that this defocus smoothing isn't a brand new technology, isn't something that Canon invented. However, Canon did it by putting it on their biggest aperture lens. Therefore, theoretically, it should provide the smoothest bokeh in addition to this APD effect. So let's look at the images here. I have image across multiple scenes, and this is to show you that really this defocus smoothing lens doesn't always produce the best bokeh you can get. And at times, the original 1.2 may actually look better. So let's take a look at this these images here, and you can come to conclusion yourself. If not, you can hear me ramble on and talk about them. Okay, for my image comparisons here, I always put my DS version on the left side and the non-DS version on the right side. And for this first set of image, I think if anybody of you seen the initial review, you would have already seen this image itself and the comparison with it. Just to note that Straight off, you can tell that the DS version does have a slightly different color tone, a bit more yellowish, while the original is a bit more pinkish, a bit more bluish. It's just different because I guess the APD coating that is on the lenses in the DS version is actually resulting this shift in terms of color. Other than that, there's of course the other thing is that say the DS version is acting more like a f1.8 lens, and therefore it is like a f1.2 stop down, resulting in wide open, a slightly sharper image, and an image with slightly more contrast and slightly more depth of field. As you can see here, the hair strands is slightly sharper versus the hair strands on the original 1.2, which is actually being slightly out of the depth of field and therefore slightly softer. And that they work almost the same in terms of image quality. Very good CA control, very sharp wide open, very sharp all the way to the edges. Of course, the DS version is slightly darker, 1 over stop loss of light. At certain part of the images, it loses more than 1 and 1/3 stop, and in the center, it loses slightly lesser. Okay, but let's talk about bokeh itself. And bokeh is a very subjective thing. So let's look at the building here, which is the most obvious bokeh item. Now, this building here is actually really, really far. I estimate it to be more than a 1 km away, so it is nearly infinity to this lens. So let's look at the bokeh, and if you notice one thing is that in this case, right, this building have lines, and you can tell that the bokeh on the original 1.2 is bigger. Look at the width of this line versus the width of this line. This is a 1.2 bokeh, and this is probably something like a 1.8 bokeh. But because the DS version has no edges, look at it, totally no edge, while the 1.2 version has edge. You can in fact see some overlapping edges that is overlapping each other, so it looks like multiple little circles that is going all around. And this thing here results in the bokeh to be slightly less smooth and at times a bit distracting, or what people will call as busy bokeh. Now, in this image itself, it's really not very busy, but you just imagine many small little lights clustering together, and though the rings are now overlapping each other, it results in a really busy look if you can see the rings shown on the screen itself. So in this case, I would say as the bokeh of the DS version is slightly better because it kind of removes any form of distraction in the bokeh itself. I mean, yes, some people will say the right side, the original version has more character, it has more texture, but I mean, bokeh is just blurriness, right? So to some people, definitely they just want the blurrest, the softest thing in the background ever, and definitely the DS version in this shot is that bokeh. So now let's move on to another shot here. Before we move on to these two, let's move on to these two. So the DS version, non-DS version. So in this shot shows you the fall off of the bokeh from sharp, which is the subject, and then to the back. And you notice straight away that in this case, when you're looking at fall off and you're looking at gradual bokeh over distance, I would say as the 1.2 probably performs slightly better. You can see this really smooth fall off into the back, while this one is like sharp, 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 and starts to fall off. So I'll give the points to the 1.2 when it comes to bokehing, gradual bokeh fall off in a shot itself. But however, just note one thing, because these are railings and these railings have like lines, like metal rods in between. Now let's zoom in at the back here and you'll notice something. Let's go a little bit more. Yes. So the 1.2 version, even though it's a 1.2 lens, it cannot run away, that ultimately these later lines that get bokeh away will result in some lines in the shot itself. And if you look at the DS version, those lines literally disappear. So, if the shot has many of such lines and rods, definitely the DS version is probably going to work way better than the 1.2 version. But at least for this shot, because we are looking mainly at fall off of the railings at the side, the gradual nice bokeh that comes into the frame, I would say as the 1.2 version is better. So we go back to another shot here, and the left side is the DS, right side non-DS again. And this shot because the subject is really close, the railings are already blurred off. And in this shot itself, right, the DS really stands out a lot more. Look at these railings behind, and these railings are totally blurred off, while these railings here on the non-DS version is really obvious. So in this case, really the 1.2 version is not as good as the DS version. And what it means is that if the subject is really close and there are lines in the frame, probably the DS version does a much better job for bokeh. And lastly, we look at the next set of photos I have. This set of photos, the difference is that we are looking at buildings with windows, and these buildings are not as far as the first shot. It is about a km away or lesser. And these buildings, they have lines because they are windows, and these lines have different thickness. And for this very first shot, you'll notice that the right side version, which is the original 1.2, the lines are actually getting blurred off better than the left side, the DS version. Yes, the DS version removes the edges, however, the 1.2 actually has a bigger bokeh. As such, the lines are overlapping each other and literally disappearing from the building itself. So in this very shot, I would say as the 1.2 original does provide a slightly better bokeh than the 1.2 DS version. If you just zoom in a bit, and you will notice that actually the 1.2 original does, have some lines, but they're really insignificant. While the DS version, you can literally see the dark lines itself. So in this case, the 1.2 actually does provide a better bokeh than the DS. And then let's look at this last shot here. So this last shot here, let me rotate it properly. So this last shot here, the lines are not as thick. So there are many small little lines at the back of the frame. This has the very similar effect as the earlier time where, the lines, there's many small little lines in the bokeh region. And this is a case where the DS version really beats the original 1.2. Because the original 1.2, yes, it's bokehing away, but it results some residue lines. And these lines can be quite distracting, especially on this building itself. Well, on the DS version, it really just softens it out and turns into some mirror. You can even see the clouds in the sky. So the smoothness of the building is noticeable. And in this case, the DS version handily beats the 1.2 when it comes to bokeh, at least in my eyes. So pretty much, this is comparison between the different versions of this 1.2 lens. The DS lens is not always the best bokeh machine. It really depends. You want nice fall off over a distance, get the original 1.2. You shoot with many lines in the background scene, use the DS version. However, there's one thing that is very consistent, is that the DS output is predictable. Any lines will disappear, everything will be softened out. While the 1.2 original, at times it does produce better bokeh, at times it produces worse off bokeh. It really depends on the thickness of the line and how many lines are there in the screen. So this is probably the biggest gain using the DS lens, as if you look at a scene, just apply a Gaussian blur over the entire scene, and that is how the DS will work. It will just destroy every single hard line and makes everything soft. So as a wedding photographer, as a portrait photographer, I think that is what this DS lens gives you. Predictable bokeh, where everywhere you go, you roughly will know how the bokeh will look like, because it just eliminates all the lines and just keep the features, the colors there. While the 1.2 original does, sometimes create additional lines in the scene, which can be quite distracting. Now, if you ask me, who is this lens for? This lens is not cheap. It is 10% more than the original non-DS version. The original non-DS version comes in at about 2.8k USD, while the DS version comes in at about 3.1k USD. That is really expensive for a 85mm lens, because what you see here is a Sigma art, and the Sigma art comes in at 1.5, 1.4. So that is half the price of the DS lens. So if you are not in need of a extreme predictable bokeh, probably 85 Sigma art or the original 1.2 would have worked out. While if you are looking for always consistent smooth bokeh no matter where you go, I think this DS lens is for you. And probably the people that gain the most out of this is portrait photographers. So as a portrait photographer, really possible, rent this lens out and ask yourself, is this the bokeh you want? Because there is a reviewer out there that said that yes, it produces the smoothest bokeh, however, at times you want a little bit of texture and roughness. So, character, smoothness. Think about it, and I hope you enjoyed this review here. Do like and subscribe, and see you next time. Bye bye.